morning, welcome, dobrodošli, dobro jutro. So for all of you who have been yesterday listening to Slavoj Žižek, definitely you are my heroes, because I know it was really late. And for all of you that came from Ljubljana, thank you for being so punctual. And this is also part of responsibility. And you know that today we will talk about ESG, so a lot will be told about responsibility for environment, for social and governance. And I don't know if you know, but if you Google ESG, you get more than 600 million hits. So I'll just mention a few things that I found interesting for today's discussion, but I know that you're all waiting for the great speakers to give their opinions, and of course, you will be also included into discussion. So a few facts that I think are interesting, like fruit for thought, are like if you would put the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, so SDGs, the leading ESG framework for large companies, at the center of the world's economic strategy, you could unlock 12 trillion a year in opportunities and generate 380 million jobs. If ESG strategies can affect operating profits by as much as 60% and positively impact equity returns by as much as 63%. So there are facts that you can Google, so we put too much on this, so everybody who is teaching communication would say too much. And that's why we wanted to ask you, is ESG a buzzword or it's really in the corner of every CEO mind? And if this is something that we will all work around. I'm really happy that today we have great panelists with us. So let's start with Professor Dr. Adriana Rec-Buchovec. Good morning and welcome. And I'll just ask you, anyone who wants to talk, just put the button. Then I'm happy that Professor Dr. Dejan Verčič from the Faculty of Social Sciences at Partner and Herman and Partners is with us. John Denhoff, President of the Board of Nova KBM, always an interesting speaker, and he always brings some other thoughts to the discussion. And of course, I'm happy to also say good morning to Mateusz Frangas, Secretary of State at the Ministry of Economic Development and Technology. And from Berlin, we have with us Rowan Barnett, Director of Google Org, Europe and Middle East. Before we enter into discussion, I'll be really happy to also introduce and invite, for the first time on the AmCham Business Breakfast, speaker, Ambassador of the United States to Slovenia, Her Excellency Jamie Herpootlian. Please.
Good morning. I have to admit, I'm one of the 600 hits on Google when Aisha asked me to speak about this topic. And it is a very fascinating topic, and there's great debate about it. I want to say good morning to the distinguished guest here and to the panelists. I'm honored to be here with you. And Aisha, thank you for the invitation to speak today. It was almost 100 years ago, in 1931, the dean of Harvard Business School asked a question that could very well have been asked yesterday. His question was this: how can we as businessmen best meet the needs of the people, supply their wants, maintain profits, handle problems of unemployment, face the Russian challenge, and at the same time aid Europe and contribute most to or disturb least the cause of international peace? And this was his answer. The only way is through leadership which accepts social responsibility and meets the sound needs of the great majority of our people. So while he did not use the specific term ESG or environmental, social, and governance, The dean very closely described the concept way back in 1931. The goal of ESG is to make a company's operations safe for the planet, to protect human rights, to practice inclusivity and diversity in the workplace, and to offer transparent corporate governance for investors. So, in a nutshell, policies for a more just and sustainable world. Instead of the old 1980s maxim, greed is good, now it's green is good. Investor demand for ESG assets has skyrocketed. Europe, where the ESG regulatory scheme and ESG industry is more developed, dominated the market until 2018 and still accounts for approximately half of global ESG assets. The United States, however, is beginning to take the lead, with ESG assets reaching $17 trillion in 2020 and expected to exceed $20 trillion in 2022. Global ESG assets are on track to exceed $50 trillion by 2025. So, what is different from 1931? Why the change? What's new is the tremendous shift in people's mindset to seek out companies that are good for both financial value and societal value. People have woken up to what's at risk, and there is a definite appetite for change. The dramatic shift is spurred by science and technological advances converging with cascading challenges across our planet. These challenges present real costs to businesses. For example, climate-related weather events are expected to cost businesses $1.3 trillion by 2026. The most recent report from the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change makes clear that time is running out. Every year of delayed action on climate change puts the world on a path to exponentially greater loss and damage. Thankfully, we have an opportunity, a narrow window of opportunity to transform the way we live in the world. Capital markets can obviously be a powerful tool to create change, and we do see the results of ESG standards leading companies to improve their performance across ESG measures, reducing carbon emissions, ensuring diversity of corporate boards, taking care of employees' welfare, and increasing accountability in the boardroom to root out corruption. But enduring change will require collective action from governments, the private sector, and investors working together on local and global levels. It all starts with transparency. Government efforts to encourage transparency incentivize companies to monitor and measure their performance on ESG. That is why regulations such as the EU's Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation and the recent SEC proposals to enhance disclosures by U.S. funds about ESG practices are so important. There are other tools, like whistleblower laws. These can, if properly enforced, be an effective guardrail for holding corporations to their obligations. Improve transparency in the public procurement process and enforcing anti-corruption laws are additional concrete measures that support ESG policies. I'm happy to report that Slovenia is leading the way on this trend. Last year, Slovenia successfully issued its first 10-year sovereign sustainability bond, raising 1 billion euros for environmental or social projects in the country. This landmark transaction made Slovenia the first country in Central and Eastern Europe and the second in the EU to successfully issue a sustainability bond. Likewise, our embassy embraces ESG policy. We stand ready to facilitate U.S. companies working with Slovenian companies in AmCham to support the goal of a more just and sustainable world. Our president has said this, and I will repeat it here. We are at an inflection point. And for the sake of the world we leave for future generations, there can be no turning back. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ambassador. Many thoughts that we will discuss at the panel. But first, let's start with you, dear guests. You'll have to take your phones, and after that, you'll put them all in your pockets or in your bags, because we would like you to be present in the moment. But now, what we need you to do is to scan this or go to the slido.com and write the first thing that you think of when we say ESG. So we would like to see so-called word 3 to see what is there. But of course, the question will be also asked to our dear panelists, and we'll start with you, Mr. Frangesh. So ESG, what is this in your simple words? Just
press the button.
Exactly.
Well, we are at a major crossroad, and I believe in the core of ESG is the question do we need a better world? Can we avoid achieving one? I would say that it's a system of measurements to measure the advancement we need for that change.
Great.
I think in simple terms, ESG is about forging the kind of world we want to live in, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. And as a businessman, I think of it like a contract. You wouldn't sell your house without knowing the details. What's the price? What's the square meters? And I think ESG really has to become a contract for how we dictate caring about the earth and about our people, which includes also our clients and our employees.
Great one. Adriana?
This is going to be an evolving concept. It has started with corporate sustainability, environmental, social, economic. Now it's ESG, but it's going to be beyond something like that. And you see that in the environmental sphere, we're moving beyond sustainability into regenerative concepts. So how do we not only decrease the footprint, but improve our handprint? So how can we restore the society, the environment, etc.? So it's going to be evolving over the decades. And we'll see new and new concepts and measurements and management structures and systems being put in place. So on the environmental side, I think we have great policies that will support that. But on the social side, it'll be about leading by example. Mm-hmm. Everybody, each of us, and managers in particular, leading by example. Mm-hmm.
Great. Dan?
I would call it the most profound social, economic, and political revolution we are seeing in our lifetime. It's going to have more important consequences, long-term consequences than pandemic or even the war in Ukraine. Many things which are happening around us and which at the moment we can perceive as separate events are already linked to this revolution going on. For example, for me, driving a German car, it was quite a shock, the announcement that German car industry is stopping R&D in diesel machines, which was the core of their competency. If you want to understand why the Dutch farmers are on strike, it's exactly directly linked to ESG. And if you want to understand direction in which three industries which are going to be more and more important and which are probably going to take the position that ICT sector has at the moment, which is biotechnology, food, and pharma, are going to have. It's all directly related to ESG and what kind of food we are going to consume, how we are going to produce that food, and how this is going to affect the world in which we live. So it may be the most important thing happening at the moment.
But then, of course, the question is, are businesses aware of it? And are they taking enough responsibility? I know it's a really broad question, but what will be the incentive that businesses will start at?
There are several incentives already in place. First of all, you have asset management companies which are at the forefront of this movement. For example, if you think about BlackRock, which has announced that stakeholder capitalism is the future of free markets. Unless we solve the question of the license to operate, we are not going to survive. So you have private capital on one side. On the other side, in United States, you have Security and Exchange Commission now preparing regulation of the risks associated with ESG, which are probably going to come into force, some of them next year, but it's going to be mainly the next administration which is going to have that on the plate, and it's going to be a huge political battle. Now, this is the US direction. In the EU, we have so-called double materiality, which means that on one side, companies are responsible to investors and have to take the risks in. But on the other side, there are separate responsibilities which exist towards societies and even towards the environment we have in Europe now in the directives of the European Union. And everything that has started with the green agenda and then moved to other, there is now a whole series of directives that are in place which are now governing how we have to adjust the way not only businesses, all of us behave. They are now developing a regulatory environment which on one side is going to, European way, force us top-down how to change our behavior. But we have also major companies. Think about Unilever, for example, a Dutch company who has been now in several analyses directly accused of accelerating the Dutch environmental policies, which are together with the Dutch international banks changing the environment in which the Dutch agricultural sector operates. And so they have to, I don't know, lower the numbers of the cattle, they have to lower the way they're using fertilizers and things like that. So these things are happening, and they're coming from all different directions. I would say intelligent businesses already understand in which directions the world is going on. And even in Slovenia, I would say we have several businesses in Slovenia who are preparing for legislation. Several directives of the EU are becoming enforceable in 2023 and 2024. And only few of the major companies in Slovenia understand it. But let me tell you one thing. I'm aware of Slovenian farmers. There was a major fair, agricultural fair in Murska Sobota last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago. Okay. They were discussing seriously what's their position towards ESG, because at the moment they're afraid. They don't understand what is going on. Nobody is working with them. Nobody is giving them any intelligent direction how to adjust to the new world. They understand it's coming. They only see it as restrictions, and they are afraid. So I think things are rolling, and they are just going to accelerate.
Adriana, would you agree that the businesses are one of the most important stakeholders in that, or all of the stakeholders should push for it?
Well, it's clear that responsibility lies upon every actor in the society, but I agree that the businesses may play the major role because they're much more agile, they're much more innovative, and this is about innovation and opportunity. So ESG should not be about risk and compliance, because we will not get far enough. And by just following regulation and complying with regulation, we'll have just a very slow step-by-step process and not spearheading change. So businesses have to do the first step and showcase what we can do. And we have done so much in Slovenia as well. At some point, I will explain a bit more, but we have had a number of projects led by Spirit Slovenia, and over 75 Slovenian companies have undergone sustainability transformation with a really inspiring processes, transforming mindsets of people in the organizations, and then changing processes and products and business models, amazing stories, and this will take the lead. This will inspire others.
It's so great to see passion in your eyes when talking about that, and we'll definitely return to that. But the banks, we expect a lot from banks because you are the ones who basically finance and can also tell where the direction should go, right?
Well, absolutely. Banks are in a very interesting position to see what's happening and to influence it. You know, everybody thinks of banks as the supermarket for money, but if you look at it more deeply, it's access to capital for any kind of business venture and growth. So clearly, investors are looking at it more from a risk mitigation standpoint, but also as a source of alpha or value add. You know, if you look at how we're doing, I think the momentum is there, but it's not really enough to make a sustainable difference long enough. So we have to really increase the momentum. If you look at the Europe Sustainable Development Report, it shows Slovenia is not doing too bad. I think we rank 9th out of 34. But the problem is, even if Slovenia meets all of its commitments and the neighbors around us do not, it's not going to be enough. So it's increasingly about getting that cohesiveness across sectors, across governments, let alone just Europe, but even beyond. So I think we have a lot to do to help companies we serve develop their own roadmaps. Ultimately, it comes down to having an action plan that's measurable. If you don't have a sense of what's your carbon emissions today, or what you're going to do this year or next year to reduce those, and what your actions are, your top 10 actions to drive those, who's going to do it by when, we won't get there. So this thinking has to permeate really the business strategies and the approaches that all the companies we serve.
So it really should go to action, not just discussing it, but act fast.
Exactly.
We'll move to Berlin now. Rowan, so the question, the first one, ESG in the simple words, and of course how businesses are important and what should be the role is on the table. So please tell us your opinion.
Thank you. Dobre jutro всем. And sorry I can't be with you in person. But look, fascinating. I think already the panel have touched on so many important aspects of the ESG. I think, as the ambassador just outlined as well, of course, you know, businesses hold some of the biggest levers that we have to help create more equitable and sustainable economies and societies and a healthy planet. And certainly if we look at the current situation we are in, just kind of emerging from the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the scale of natural and climate disasters, has never been a more pressing time for us humans and businesses to pull all the levers that we have at our disposal. And I think what we're seeing is huge momentum from people around the world voting with their feet. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things that will keep businesses ensuring that we're moving in that direction, along with, I think, the stakeholders within a company, the employees. So I think those two are absolutely critical to driving that momentum forward. But certainly the ESG plays an important role in providing transparent frameworks and providing the opportunity for stakeholders and investors to also hold companies accountable to the goals that they are setting to ensure that we're working towards healthy, just and sustainable economies and planet.
Great, thank you. And now it will be really interesting to see what you are thinking about that. So let me see what are the words that pop up. So sustainability, future, money, green, responsibility, blockchain, sustainable development, water, respect, opportunity, better future world, only option, okay, reflex for all, necessity, politics, hope. So positive, new MDGs, yeah, okay. So love, oh wow, interesting association you have, but good to see what's up there. And I'm also really happy to announce that today we're launching a business ethics and compliance glossary that was done by our Committee for Corporate Ethics Transparency. So this will be a live thing. That's why we ask you for the question, for the words, to put it in, because what we realize is that sometimes we don't know what we are really talking about. We all think that this is something that we are aware of, but then we realize that there are many lacks of even the wording, not the what goes beyond the action points. If we move a bit in comparison, do you think, Adriana, that there is a difference between European and American businesses, how they approach ESGs, and how this is done and why?
I have to admit, yes. The difference is not big, but we're seeing the major difference in where the drivers come from. So the bottom-up push is much stronger than the one from the top. So regulation is not as strong as it is in Europe, while the expectations of consumers are much higher. Based on some recent research, 80% of consumers expect, I mean, those that understand what these concepts mean, sustainable, regenerative, etc., they're thinking about sustainability as a very passive attitude, sustainability as sustaining what we have, done in terms of damage, and they expect companies to come up with solutions that would regenerate planet and society, and that's coming from America, not Europe. In terms of the purchasing attitudes, in Europe we see a bit less willingness to pay, a lower willingness to pay up to 15% in some industries, while in America it's up to 20%. So yeah, there is a bit of a change. But as we look at the best examples, we see them at all continents. So we have leading European corporations and small businesses, as well as we have American ones. Yeah, so I think that the spearheading companies are all over the world. Asia, Africa, Australia, South America, everywhere, yeah.
We heard John saying that if Slovenia is aware enough and on the ranks high enough, and then our surroundings are not, it will create a problem. Then would you estimate that in C region, the importance of ESG is well taken, or is Slovenia the one who is leading it? So how would you?
I would absolutely agree that Slovenia is leading in the region, and the whole region at the moment is lagging behind, and is going to be, I think, a huge problem, particularly because we have a huge problem with legitimacy of governments in the whole region. Trust in governments in our region is extremely low, and we have disconnection with the system, so to say, if you like, political system on one side, and youth in particular on the other side. I was involved in the young BSF 2 days ago in Ljubljana, and I was discussing with our younger colleagues about political participation, and what majority of them said, surprisingly to me, is that they find today's youth in our region extremely politically active.
Really?
Yes, but what they say, it's horizontally active, meaning they discuss among themselves. They self-organize on their own level. The problem is that they are not connected to the political system. So the political parties and other political institutions are not connecting these horizontal activities among young people with the whole system. And I think that this is a huge potential. There is a tension existing at the moment between these two levels, and it can produce energy, actually. Whenever you have a tension, you can use it either productively or in a damaging direction. But I think that if businesses want to survive in this environment, we have a huge problem, not in Slovenia, but if you go further southeast from Slovenia, you have a huge problem, people voting with their feet, actually moving away from the region, which is going to cause huge problems finding the workforce. If they want to keep those people there, if they want those countries to sustain, they have to connect with the youth. And if they want to connect with the youth, they have to come with the ESG revolution for this environment. But again, the language we are using here, including the ESG, is very technocratic language. It's very technical. So normal people don't understand what we are talking about. So we have to develop narratives to make it understandable and to make sense to ordinary people, particularly to the youth. And in that direction, we can I think, make major changes in very fast. I mean, if something we know in the region, it's improvise. We are very fast in improvising and catching up. So I think if there is a will, there is also going to be a way to do it very fast.
We'll come back for the stories, because this is the narrative probably that we want to hear. But I would really like to ask you, Mateusz, what is Slovenia doing? We heard that there are some good things that we've done, that we are leading the way, at least in the region. But what is Slovenia doing that different stakeholders will have incentives to really be faster and act faster?
Am I allowed to reflect on some of the thoughts
Sure.
first? Okay, first of all, thank you, Professor Vercic, for mentioning new generations. I believe that there is a totally new set of values coming with the new generations. Actually, we're old, a bit too old to understand this new set of values.
Speak for yourself.
However, I would like to believe, because when I see young people, and I'm happy enough to know a lot of new members of this society, and I agree, it's a horizontal process, but there is no problem in it, not yet. Because I see that this is a discussion within generations that emerge. And from these discussions that are vivid, that are even generate conflicts between themselves, but they have no, let's say, tolerance to the status quo or towards the, excuse me, but bullshitting of elder generations. They demand change, and they know they cannot expect the change from the generations ahead, but from themselves and generations beyond theirs. If I can go back into the time Mrs. Ambassador mentioned, so when the thoughts of the Harvard Dean appeared, in approximately the same time, in Italian prisons, Antonio Gramsci said one thing, and I would use this because it describes the situation we are in perfectly. He said, "When the old is dying and the new cannot be born, a whole variety of morbid symptoms appear. We are here. The old system is dying. And I would say, thank God. But the new, ESG is one part of the announcement of the new. Cannot be born, and this is the crossroad of the crises and the culmination effects of those crises we will face throughout this decade. But I will use words of Professor Vercic once again. You mentioned farmers at Agra in Gorna Radgona. Why are they afraid? Because it is about the transition. It is about the present point and the path toward our vision. So, in this transition, it is of most important that we take care of everyone, to empower people, societies, businesses, governments, international community to make this transition and not let everyone behind. What is, going back to your question, thank you. Today, CER, Sustainability Future Partnership in Slovenia, published 5 awards, Green Star, for the first time to award companies that reflect their social and environmental and governance responsibility. Those companies are Nova KBM.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Elan, the famous ski equipment producer in Slovenia. Jelovica, the producer of sustainable houses. Lumar, Marko Lukic also present today. Also the producer and designer of environmentally friendly and energy efficient houses. And also Slovenian state holding, so SDH. Mrs. Anna, have I forgotten one? No? Okay. So these are the leaders. These are the leaders from the business sector, but we need leaders in new generations, we need leaders in the governments, we need leaders in the societies and international community to advance the change. Just a thought, I have a new office for 3 months now, and I have a big whiteboard. And I have to admit that on this whiteboard, I've put one single statement so far. And it says like this: we are not here to manage business as usual. We are here to lead the change.
Great. And of course, I'll ask you how you will do it.
Oh, the hard question. Okay.
The rest of the board's still empty, you know? It takes time.
Well, Margaret Mead, a famous anthropologist from the States, once said, don't ever underestimate a power of a small group of people to change the world. I really believe that. But now we see businesses, financial institutions, governments, United Nations, European Union, states going in the same direction. It's not a small group of people anymore. So what we have to do is actually the universal recipe of all things if you want to bring change. Connect, motivate, empower, help. And in this transition, the role of the governments is essential because we see a vision for this country, green, beautiful, active, healthy, with best wines and best dishes, with best activities in outdoors, but with a very innovative and straightforward-looking economy. We know that in these processes, I would say 8 years, 2 governmental mandates, for this government, I hope. We need to help businesses and societies to empower and build this change.
So it will be really important the businesses will be part of the change and will be at the table because, as you said, we need to empower everyone. Is that achievable, and how then?
I think it is because
Like you have me here.
Yeah. I think it is because generally what the system now is actually responding to what people are demanding anyway. We have simply gone too far in exploiting this poor planet, which will survive anyway. The only question is whether we can survive on it. So we have to find a way how to make this planet livable again. If we continue linearly from where we are now, we are simply going to destroy ourselves. And the planet is going to throw us out. So we have to find a way, and that's why the youth is so important, because young people understand that naturally somehow. For those of you who are from Slovenia, you have witnessed part of that revolution already in Slovenia, how the youngsters self-organized themselves for the referendum on the water and then for the last elections. We wouldn't have this government if the youngsters wouldn't self-organize themselves. This is actually the government that was brought into power by youngsters. Without their active political participation, if they wouldn't have gone to these elections, the government could be completely different.
Can I jump in with a question?
Sure.
can this be then also a bit dangerous that populism comes too much? Because I adore young people. We have, I'm really proud of that, in AmCham Young Platform, more than 2,000 young leaders who are really organizing, have different thoughts, are leaders that I admire truly. But can it be dangerous that if you know that, let's say, a civil society brought you up and that then they want different demands, that you become too populistic and then the G factor can be a bit dangerous? Can that happen?
I would call it challenging, not dangerous. And you are absolutely right. We live at a time when we are discussing in political sciences hyper-democracy. We live in a Me Too society. I'm first me, then everybody else, and everybody wants to have a say. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has an opinion that wants to be taken as seriously as of the top scientists. We've seen that during the pandemic. So yes, it's a very bubbling time, so to say. And here comes in a question of political organizations. That's why we need politics. That's why we need politicians. That's why we need leaders. You can have a mass out there, or you can have organized publics which are going in an intelligent and desirable directions. So a lot depends on how we are going to politically organize ourselves and what kind of activities are we going to promote and how we are going to, if you want, also teach our youngsters how to behave in political environment. Yes, it's challenging. It can go either direction, so to say, but I'm absolutely optimistic because my feeling is that there is some kind of natural intelligence out there that particularly youngsters have the right feeling where to go, and I hope that they will be successful in that.
John, I need to return to you regarding young and old, and of course discussion, if this interlinear discussion or it should go also different way. But where is the place for, I would estimate, majority of us then? What should we do and how should we act and react?
Well, I mean, when we look at our clients, you see very different parity among companies. So in different sectors, some companies are way ahead and some are way behind. And like we were saying, they're afraid, they don't know what to do. They hear about it, they want to help, they're passionate, but they don't know what to do. So I think, as Dejan said, it's a lot about organization and structure, how we get everybody moving to the beat of one drum. And this is why I believe the secret is really what you measure is what you're managing. And we need to first work top down to make sure all the leaders of companies that we deal with, whether it's our bank or whether it's companies that deal with the government, students that are entering the workforce, this awareness has to grow. But the leaders need to push top down what's the vision. We started a few years ago a relaunched ESG strategy, really putting forward-looking principles into our strategy. So it has to be at the very top. But that alone doesn't do anything. Then you need to, as I said, lay out a roadmap where you actually quantify where you're going to be 1 year from now, where you're going to be 2 years from now. And then you look at what are the projects that are needed, what's the investment required, and then you move forward. So I think right now the problem is everybody's aware something's happening, but not everybody's on the bandwagon. And we really need to work to organize ourselves so that it's better orchestrated. One thing we talk about a lot, also through the mentor program of AmCham, but also within our leaders within the bank, is sustainable leadership. This is a new topic. And what it really means for me, it's about leaders who are able to inspire action toward a better world. So they either take action or they ideally lead others to do the same. And this is something we're trying to teach people, trying to encourage them to step up and actually incorporate ESG principles into everything they do. So slowly you see it permeating all the different policies of the bank, all the different processes in the bank and so on. But this has to trickle down now through the various sectors. When we give financing to a given company, and of course, as one of the largest banking conglomerates in the country, we touch almost every sector. What you see is there's not a lot of data. Companies don't know where their starting point is. What is their carbon production today? So we're using a lot of extrapolated data. But one thing we're doing to set an example is requiring an ESG assessment for every loan we give. This is happening now for all corporate lending, it's happening for all SME lending, and we're actually planning now to push that into private individual lending so that people start to become aware, I need to quantify these things and define a starting point. And once you have a starting point, the route ahead seems a lot more manageable. When you're looking up at Mount Everest, it seems like a long way away, but it always starts with one step at a time.
If you would go across, and it's your gut feeling, a bit of data, as you mentioned, but would you say that in the C-suites of the Slovenian corporates, there is anxiety or excitement about ESG?
Well, for sure there's both. There's anxiety because I think people are aware we're running against the clock, and the clock is ticking fast. As the ambassador said, we have still an opportunity, but we have to accelerate the pace of change. We cannot move at the same pace we're moving even today. So despite all we say about existing momentum, it's clearly not enough. But I think there is excitement also because people realize it's a very interesting, multifaceted, challenging area where we have to change collective mindset. So it's a huge but exciting challenge. And therein lies, I think, the sweet spot for good managers to say it's a great place to operate and to transform companies faster than ever.
Adriana, your eyes lit up when you're talking about the great companies in Slovenia. Now maybe it's time to mention what they're doing greatly, what are the things that inspire you, and of course, if this excitement is there.
Mm-hmm. Maybe as a quick introduction into my answer, I'll touch the question that you asked before. I would like to see the environment, the political, economic environment, to be more enabling and not provide barriers, particularly for medium-sized and small companies, because it will be a big challenge. They will not have people to deal with the criteria and data gathering and calculations. And I'm afraid that in this field, there will be consulting companies earning more money than there would be money channeled to these companies to produce new products, develop new solutions, and do changes at the level of processes. So I think we need support at the level of municipalities, state agencies, wherever, so that these companies will not be exhausted by trying to follow the rules that are being set up right now. You know, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, with the standards coming out now in October, I mean, it's going to be shocking, I'm sure, for everybody, for large, let alone for small companies. And we need to provide support that will be easily accessible and not financially, you know, burdening. But at the level of companies, yeah, what we see, and a couple of months ago, I was approached by OECD because they were so interested in the project that we do here in Slovenia. So Spirit launched a pilot project in 2016, and we have a representative from one company here, Mojca Markezeti, the former CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer from Iskra Emeco. They were on the pilot, and Mark as well from Lumar. Amazing stories, transformations, you know, from scratch to something that's really amazing and with lots of people participating. So these transformations are not done in C-suites. We get large groups of people from R&D, innovation, manufacturing, marketing, all departments of an organization, and we produce a novel strategy with sustainability concepts in it, articulate supporting structures and measurement systems and rewarding systems, because this all has to be aligned. And then you can have a pathway to a new future. And we have done that at the pilot level in 2016-17, and then the big project was running from 2019 through 2022, 60 companies, small and medium-sized, amazing stories, and you can all access their achievements and impacts on the official website of Spirit. But I think they're leading the change in this part of Europe with sustainable business models. Some have regenerative business models, new products, new processes, really great stories.
Great, and this leads us, Mateusz, to question how we will empower and not limit, as Adriana mentioned, like with all the things that needs to be done, and not left behind. Some of them, is there something that the ministry is preparing in this regard?
Well, thank you, John. Yes, there are European regulations that were already mentioned. And of course, especially the financing sector, and I don't mean just the banks, but also the state as a funder of development projects, the energy transformation of the companies. inventing new business models, getting from linear to circular. It is important that while providing those grants or loans by the state, that the state fully embraces the ESG criteria. And by doing that, you create a wholesome, let's say, ecosystem of support from the private sector, from the asset and finance companies to the state, that you do that. Also, thank you for mentioning all the good things Spirit as an agency of the Ministry of Economic Development Technology is doing. And we need to build such ecosystems within the country, empower groups that will help each other because, as I said, it's a connected process. It's a process that we have to bring everyone on board. So in this role, I see the future role of the state, helping in the process of transition to achieve the major goal.
And of course, then the question is, we are all talking about the winter is coming. We are talking about security, peace. And I always question myself, are these noble and, as we heard today, necessary measurements can be in the focus of businesses, of states in such terms, and how to make sure it will not be like, let's do it when it will be over, the winter and the spring will come. So what do you think? This is the question for all of you. Mateusz, maybe if you start with you.
Well, I'll start with what Prime Minister Golob said yesterday. In a short term, this crisis doesn't help. We're burning coal and oil instead of maybe more, let's say, environmentally friendly energy. But in the long term, this crisis forces us for a major shift. Yes, we have acute problems, the war, the energy crisis. But if we want to overcome the problems of today's Europe or world, we have to set the alternative. Because I totally agree that there are dangers or challenges within the political scope. So yes, these new times can lead to a dangerous society, a populist society, a society where there will be no Me Too democracy, but where only the top elite will decide on the questions. We have those examples not only in Asia or Africa, we have these examples also here, in Europe, in our neighborhood. So it is very important that this alternative sets the pathway. No, there is no one alternative. Let's go to the Pigs Bay. You know, it was the cautiousness of one world leader that prevented the nuclear war back then. We need such leaders. We need a society with this consciousness. But
who will take the
with
lead? Yeah.
the alternative in the mind.
John, would you agree with that? So if we go back to businesses, do you think that the business leaders are the ones who should really keep it in focus, though there are big challenges coming up?
I think that has a key role to play, and I do agree with everything that was said. What's important for me are really two aspects. So one is the collective awareness has to grow much more significantly. You know, when leaders and businesses are doing all the right things across all sectors, it's still not going to be enough if the consumer demand hasn't changed the way, you know, pull for a particular product set exists. And I think the second thing that's needed is a cohesive set of policies. So even if we get it right in Slovenia, it's important that a lot of the measurements for companies that work across multinational areas are homogeneous. So I think if we can start to all pull in the same direction, at least as Europe, and set a shining example then for the States and for Asia and for other regions, it'll be possible. And I think raising that awareness is a long journey yet. It's about communication, it's about consistency, and like momentum, once you get it.
So the role of me, for example, as a professor, is to facilitate that and to make this even more flourishing and to build a bridge between these young people that enter the job world and help companies profit from that. And university has this important role to make this connection between what we develop and innovate and that companies also need. And I think at the level of companies, what we will have to see in the future is that at the level of values, of course, that you'll be much more attentive to the values that people bring into your working environments, and please find people that can become viral with their sustainability mindsets, because they are amongst you, but they just have to get their stage and perform. And leading by example will be I think the prominent leadership style, because it's not only inevitable way to make change, but people cannot resist when they see a leader lead by example, because, if they don't, why should I? Mm-hmm. See, and that's, I think, why leadership is really prominent as an actor in our society. Yeah.
Then you, as a professor, are one of the 10 most quoted people globally in PR. But I know that you discuss a lot also values. So how important are values and leading by example?
Extremely important. But let me first return to your original question in this round, because I think it's very important to understand that when we are talking about ESG, we are not talking only about the environment. We are talking about accounting for environmental, social, and governance risks that have to be reported. Now, the mess in which we in Europe are at this very moment, and I'm not talking about Ukraine, which is in a very specific situation of foreign aggression, but the rest of us are facing consequences of bad management of risk. Europe has been warned for decades, and Germany in particular, that dependence on Russian oil and gas is going to be something we will have to pay for, sooner or later. And actually, we are now paying for that. That risk was not taken into account. So if we are taking ESG seriously, we have to take the whole 360-degree risks into account. And it would be extremely important now that political leaders and political commentators would be able to explain to citizens today that the mess in which we are now is because we were not living in an ESG manner, if you like. And actually, if we start taking the accounting and criteria seriously, we are actually protecting our future. Not only environmental future, but also the systemic future. So, for me, this energy crisis we are facing now is a good warning of what happens if you're not managing risks well. And ESG here can help us tremendously. And for that reason, a kind of value change is needed in our societies. I would say it this way. When the Berlin Wall fell down in early 90s, I was a member of that generation. Janez knows that in late 80s, 90s, we were doing all kinds of things. But my motto has always been, I'm engaged in politics so that I can forget about it. Mm-hmm. That's the reason why I'm politically engaged. I just want not to be bothered with politics again. And then this spirit has been actually nicely articulated by Francis Fukuyama, who wrote the famous article and later the book, The End of History. Meaning that the West has won, we have no more enemies, and our values are universal values, so we don't have to worry anymore. We don't have problems. And in a certain way, the whole Western world depoliticized itself on the level of values and on the level of institutions. We lowered our guards, so to say. And we have to, in that way, repoliticize ourselves again. We have to go 2,000 years backwards in history to old Greeks and accept that people who are not interested in politics are idiots, which is the original meaning of the term idiot. No? Those who are not considering what's going on around there. We have to repoliticize ourselves. That's why I'm saying it's good that I see that among youngsters, because the only way to protect our way of life is by engaging again. If we are not prepared to socially, publicly, politically to engage, we have no future. And those who are active are going to run us over. It's as simple as that.
And now one not easy question, because I will ask you to give one person or a company that is leading by example. It can be from the region, it can be from Slovenia or worldwide, but I really would like to see, because we also need to show to people or to companies or to organizations that are leading by example. Mateusz, can we start with you? Easy question for you.
I would really need a round for a good idea.
John?
Well, I think among banks, ING is a leader. If I look in Slovenia, I think our shareholders, EBRD in particular, as well as Apollo, are starting to take a more impactful role in really driving capital to where it belongs. And just adding to what you said, I think it's not only about re-engaging and repoliticizing, it's also by voting with the way we spend with our euros, because it's this economic force that will, the political structure will just set up the rules of engagement, but the euros will drive who wins and who loses in terms of economic survival. And this is the companies we need, are the green companies have to be favored. So if we want a clean environment, we actually have to pay for it.
Exactly. Adriana?
This is really difficult, but I'll try to not avoid the answer, right?
That's also a responsibility,
yeah.
not to avoid.
So I'll pick a couple of females and a couple of males, okay, that I have worked with in the past and that I admire tremendously. So on the female side, definitely Mojca Marchesetti. Hi, Mojca. So the former Chief Sustainability Officer at Iskra-Emeco, a very demanding industry. Demanding owners of Iskra-Emeco, but spearheading like Jean Arc, So I like what she does. And I
we are
like
proud that she is the chair of our sustainability committee, so thank you, Mojca, also for that.
Yeah. And also Jasna Vidmar-Svetlik. I like her simple way of how she looks at the changes that will be major in Studio Moderna, but there is no barrier for her. Yeah, so she will just go step by step, and I think you'll achieve amazing changes, Jasna. So go forth. Yeah. On the male side, I have worked in the past a lot with Matjaž Čemažar from Dumil, and I admire him because as an engineer by his original professional, he was able to embrace the wide challenges of management in general, and now he's leading this amazing Slovenian development company with aspiring goals. And when we talked about carbon capture, storage, and utilization as a very novel way of how to fight, carbonization, he said, well, we're not doing anything very sophisticated. There's Pokljuka nearby with the forests dying. We'll just replant Pokljuka, very simple, straightforward thinking. So I like the way he thinks. And of course, Marko Lukic, Lumar. Amazing stories. I think the entrepreneurship philosophy that you have has been nicely transformed into sustainability mindset, and you're definitely leading the way for a number of other medium-sized and small companies. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We really do need stories to better understand, as Dan said, ESG. It's life. It's not out there somewhere in the clouds. It's here on the earth. Dan?
I would say on the global level, Microsoft in the States and Unilever in Europe. For Slovenia, I would congratulate the 5 green stars that were announced earlier today.
Great. So we are around.
Yeah, and I do not have a creative answer. But if I would need to set a focus on one, I would say this new generation we were talking about. New set of values, new set of views, very strong opinions about all the things previous generations failed. And I think it's a very good starting point for the measurement in future advancement. So I'm really betting on this generation coming ahead.
Super. And we all know that with us is Mr. Rowan. So Google is doing a great job in corporate philanthropy. That's why maybe if you can describe what you're doing and, of course, how do you invest in Slovenia and in the region?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think this has been an absolutely fascinating discussion and debate. And I think if I just maybe touch on a couple of areas before I go into that, I think as Mateusz was saying about we're not here to manage business as usual, but really lead the change and the role of businesses in doing that. I think certainly Google and the founders of Google would subscribe to that, that role of leadership, and both from a founder level but now at a CEO level, is so critical. And it goes not just critical for business, it's critical also for employees. And I do feel that they've got a huge role to play. I was just in New York at our Google.org offsite to bring together our leaders that are leading our philanthropy from around the world, and we have got a very young and diverse generation of employees, and it's just incredible, really, to see their passion and their the equity lens they take, the way they hold themselves accountable, the questions they're really asking. And I think if you don't wait, as a business, if you don't tap into that energy and that potential, then you are both not going to be setting your business up for success, but certainly you won't be able to long-term hire the talent that you need. So I think employees have such a critical role. And actually, just on the way back, as I was looking at some of the books in the airport lounge, and all of the business books there were around net positive. The Time magazine cover was how to do more good. There was, winning on purpose, the heart of business. That is what our employees are thinking about now. This is what the next generation has been mentioned. So I think that's absolutely critical. And so for Google, that couldn't have been more central, I think, right from the beginning of when the company was born. I mean, of course, for Alphabet and Google, it's about how do we build technology that improves the lives as many people as possible. And the scale and the breadth at which the company operates. We have platforms such as YouTube that are used by over 1 billion people, and that gives us both an opportunity but also the responsibility internally and externally to manage the company in an environmentally and socially responsible way. And so if I go back to Mateusz's quote on that whiteboard, I think this is where very much we've seen in our climate commitments, for instance. We've been climate neutral, carbon neutral since 2007. It's 15 years ago since we turned carbon neutral. And since then, our commitments have gone way beyond that. And now we're working towards, really leading the change and a moonshot goal of being carbon zero by 2030. That means running all our data operations, data centers, all of our offices, etc., on 24/7 carbon-free electricity. Now, that's not possible right now. We're 2/3 of the way there. AI is playing a big role. But what we want to do is not just about Google getting there by 2030. It's about how do we bring companies with us? How do we provide the technological solutions so that everyone can get to carbon zero? So I think that's very much ingrained us in our company spirit is being the leaders of change. And as you touched upon the role of Google.org, our philanthropy, well, this was a commitment made back in 2004 to put 1% of Google's equity, 1% of our Google's profits towards social good initiatives through our philanthropic arm, Google.org. And the way we think about it is bringing the best of Google to help nonprofits and social entrepreneurs, solve some of the biggest challenges. And so that's a combination of funding, looking at where can we be catalytic, where can we both be catalytic on the ecosystem level, but also really support organizations with making bold bets that have technology at their core. And just since 2017, we've provided more than 2 billion in cash grants. And a lot of that has also been driven by our employees. So we want to empower them to also help, ensure that we are putting these resources towards the best organizations, but it's also then pairing with the expertise. So again, we've got so many employees that want to contribute their time. We have, AI experts, we have engineers, we have UX designers. And so we have, for instance, a fellowship program where we deploy teams of employees, 10, 15 engineers in a team, and we will give that team to an organization, a nonprofit, for 6 months pro bono to work full time on a deeply technical challenge. So we've deployed 3 so far alone to support organizations supporting the Ukraine relief efforts, for instance, and sent one to Tech to the Rescue, which is a Polish nonprofit, helping nonprofits in the CE region match with pro bono tech talent. So, I think those are just some of the ways. And of course, they're leveraging our products. We donated over 7 billion in ad grants over the last years. And so that can really have a catalytic effect as well. But it's very much looking as, the holistic, how can we as a company bring all of our resources to bear and do them, leverage that in the best way we can for social good.
So thank you so much for this insight and what Google is doing in the right way. And now I'll test your reflexes, because it's time to ask the questions. We'll go back to Slido, type as fast as you can. And of course, our great panel will answer if possible, of course. In the meantime, when we are waiting for you, is if there would be something that is the most important that we all should remember from today, what would that be, Diane?
Engage.
Engage.
A verb? You mean a verb?
It can be a verb or a short sentence.
Enable your employees, developers, innovators, HR people. They are the core of sustainability transformation, not PR.
Oh, we'll see a fight afterwards, but let's go to John.
Act now before it's too late.
Okay, Mateusz?
Change to good.
Change to good. Okay, good words and verbs to remember. How can businesses be integrated in the local municipal sustainability processes? Maybe this is the question for you, Mateusz.
Sorry, what was the question?
So how can businesses be integrated in the local and municipal sustainability processes?
Well, every change has to be driven on all levels. So local, national-wide, regional. How can businesses be integrated? Well, I believe that we see now 5-star awards with 5 big companies, actually. So the question is, how can we do this on the level of small and medium enterprises? And actually, we see now several of events, hackathons, different types of collaborations between companies throughout the country, through the incubators and startup society, dealing with exactly that. Their integration into the process, right. And also driven by the same values and the same objectives.
There are 2 questions about what about older generations, because we were really talking a lot about younger generations. So I like the structure of the question. Since the new generations is the solution, how do we make sure we build the trust and transparency needed between the generation to affect the change in a structural manner then?
Adriana mentioned PR. I would prefer to use the term communication because people have strange ideas about PR. It's about communication, and communication is essential if we are going to do anything. You were mentioning who has to be engaged to produce change. If you want to engage those people, you have to communicate with them. You have to work with them. I'm involved in a major project that a large Slovenian company is doing, particularly in this area, where the major challenges are actually among employees who don't understand and who have questions about why is company investing so much in solar energy? Why are we dealing so much with issues of carbon emissions? Why are we dealing with all those things if that money could go directly to our salaries? So it's extremely important to develop good internal communication programs in which people are capable of internally discussing and digesting this philosophy. Because particularly with older employees, it's a serious issue. No? Future is somewhere out there. Of course, they can think about their children, but for them, they have to pay the bills at the end of the month. So it's a serious material issue for them. And it's extremely important that these buy-ins are developed, which maybe in some companies may be easier, but in some traditional companies, older companies, this is a huge problem. And working on this buy-in and bringing older generations in is extremely important. And this is this dialogue, intergenerational dialogue, which is actually needed, because younger generations are demanding something for which they don't have power to materialize yet. So they are demanding it from older generations. So older generations have to take responsibility basically for their children. And for that we need communication, and for that we need discussions going on inside companies and in the society as a whole.
There's one question about meritocracy. This is something that AmCham is really all about. Maybe this question answered by you, John?
Well, I agree that ESG, ultimately, it starts with a set of values. You either care about environment, social factors, or governance, right? And the meritocracy is part of the culture you need to have that sustainability leadership we talked about. I think it's actually a basic building block. And, you know, I saw some questions around how do we make the change, or how do we get companies to act. So, like I said, you have to have concrete plans, and you have to embed it in the way you pay people. So, you know, an example, we have 20% of our bonuses through all the management are linked to the ESG KPIs we set. So you put your money where your mouth is, and this is an important part of setting up meritocracy. But at all levels of the bank, it's really important that you create a culture of ownership. People at any level of the corporation they're in need to feel like they can make a change. So they need to have access to the top where they can communicate their ideas or grievances, and they know they won't have a, you know, reprimanded type of feedback. They need to have open door policy and access to the decisions being made.
We saw a couple of mentioning of overregulation. Mateusz, this is something that we are all worried about. So what is the best way to prevent that?
Well, stay on the level of values, set the good and unified system of measurements, and keep it simple.
Good. And the last question will go to the lady on the podium. The question about how from words to an action, we were discussing that a lot, but if the company comes to you, what are the steps?
You cannot make a good change if you don't involve a critical number of people. So for me, the first discussion we have is how many people will you entrust me, you know? And if there's a large company, it could be 40 and a bit beyond, because that's the capacity of people you can manage in a room. You can know them, they can trust you. In a small company, it could be the whole company. So that's the first one. You know, let's discuss who will be on the team that will lead the change. And you have to pick them very carefully. So the top people, middle managers, but particularly the experts, some with the background, we call them dinosaurs, and some really novel ones, just the fresh people with no prior knowledge of organizational whatever authorities. And very important is that one or two on the team are the so-called actively disengaged. So no change will happen unless you think about people who will always pose obstacles. While if you integrate them in this process, they will transform from devils into angels, and you have a very forceful energy on your side. So I think teaming up the proper people, that's the best start. And then you start with an analysis, strategy, systems, structures, all that. Measurement, impact measurement. Impact measurement is, I think, key. People will like the change, you will see impact. And impact is not how many smart meters you install. It's about what changes in people's lives will happen based on smart meters, right? Yeah.
Great. We learned so much. I'm really grateful for the great panelists. I'm also grateful for the great BSF team. This is the 6th edition of AmCham Business Breakfast within the BSF, and I really hope that we'll be back next year. But I would really like to thank all of you for being active and so many fruits for thought, but also for action. Thank you so much. Hvala.